Ohai. Petah Tikva. One of the largest Israeli cities belonging to agglomeration Gush Dan is located about 10 km to the east from Tel Aviv. Administratively treats the Central Administrative District. The area -39 square kilometers. Only place of the present city traces of parking of a Bronze Age were found. During the Persian, Roman and Byzantine eras there were settlements to Herbit and Saida, Tel Malabis and Sarah. On Tel Malabis fragments of buildings of an era of Crusaders were also found. Later the Arab-driven Malabis and Petah were founded on these places. Petah's inhabitants left the village in May 1948 during the Israeli War of Independence. The name of the settlement, Hope Gate in translation from Hebrew, is taken from the book by the prophet Hosea. Also I will give her vineyards her and the valley Achor, in from there a hope threshold, wasps. 2:15. It is based as the agricultural settlement by a group of religious Jews from Jerusalem. Their initial attempt to found a similar settlement near Jericho wasn't successful because of the obstacles repaired by the Turkish authorities. Then in 1878 they bought from the Jaffa Christian Arab Salim Kassar the site in 340 hectares at Yarkon River sources, in the boggy area, near the Arab village of Malabis, having laid thus the foundation for the first Jewish agricultural settlement during modern times. The Moshava of Rosh Pina was based for 3 weeks earlier, but under other name. Is later than his steel figuratively to call Am HaMoshavet. Mother, the word Moshav. Unlike pioneer settlements of Zionists, some of which became the large cities later were called. Founders dug the first well on the bought lands and symbolically in turn opened the earth. To the new settlement the name Petah Tikva, as they identified this area with the Bible Valley Achor, was chosen. In total the first settlers there were a little more than 10 people. They lived together in a small lodge, and for the weekend came back to the families to Jerusalem and Yaffo. In the first year they beat off attack of the Arabs living nearby. Founders of Petah Tikva, among whom there were 1. Salomon 1. Stamfer E. Robin D. Gutman managed to attract new settlers, however difficulties soon began. Malaria epidemic burst, the first harvest was low. In 1881, because of approach of a Shemitah, inhabitants left the settlement and for a while returned to Jerusalem and Yaffo. In 1882, when in Petah Tikva there were 10 houses and 66 inhabitants, malaria forced settlers to move to the village of Yehudiya. Nowadays Yehudiya source isn't specified 464 days. Though they continued to process the lands. In 1883 members of the movement to build put the settlement on the site slightly further from Yarkon's coast. Dix Havavit Zion from Bialystok joined them. In the next 2 years most of settlers returned to Petah Tikva. In 1886 inhabitants were attacked by the Arab neighbors claiming that fields belonged to them. As a result crops suffered. Thanks to the help of Havavit Zion the first 2 streets, today Pinsker Street and Havavit Zion, were built. In 1888 the Baron Rothschild accepted about a half of families of Petah Tikva under the protection. Thanks to his help swamps were drained, the school, a synagogue, winery are constructed. Management of Moshavik passed from local council to administration of the Baron. On the advice of his agronomists, settlers were engaged in winemaking and gardening. Thanks to financial aid and the increased economic activity, Petah Tikva grew to the small town which quarter of the population wasn't engaged in agriculture. In 1891 in Petah Tikva there were 464 inhabitants, and in 1900 800. Eventually between inhabitants and administration there was a tension. Crisis of winemaking at the end of the 19th century resulted in unprofitability of vineyards. Instead of them began to plant almonds and a citrus. For several years Petah Tikva became the leader in this area. In 1900 Rothschild gave the settlement to the Jewish Colonization Society. After short crisis of a moshav began to prosper again. Attacks of Arabs forced settlers to create community defense volunteer squad. The first in the country. At the head of which there was a Shapira. At the beginning of the 20th century, with the second Eliah's arrival, the Moshava turned into the center of formation of the Israeli labor movement. Here in 1905 the foundation of future party Hopol Hotzair was laid. Because of disagreements and differences in a way of life between religious residents and newly arrived workers in 1908 to the east from Petah Tikva with assistance of the Jewish Fund and the Odessa Committee the Palestine's first worker, Indanim was based. Also in the 1910 years in the city settled a great number of the Jews who arrived from Yemen who constructed to the south from a Moshava the settlement of Nakalat Yehuda. On the eve of World War I the population of a Moshava reached about 3,800 people. In agriculture more than 4,000 hired workers worked. In World War I the economy of Petah Tikva strongly suffered from the termination of shipping. After the introduction confiscation of property by the authorities was added to war of the Ottoman Empire to it. Inhabitants were called up for military service and forced labor. Besides, in 1915 landing strongly suffered from a raid of a locust. In 1917 there arrived residents of Tel Aviv running from military operations, but soon all were forcibly evacuated also from Petah Tikva. After World War I many new repatriates lodged in a Moshava and in 4 years the population reached pre-war level. In 1919 in Petah Tikva the Akohu Party Ha-Israeli Labour Party. To Avla Kohu Ha-Yevoda, which later united with Hopol Party Hotzair was created, having formed Mapei Party. In May 1921 the British troops beat off an attack of the Arab gang on a Moshava, but 4 inhabitants were killed. In 1922 Petah Tikva received the status of local council. The same year the railroad soednited with the station Rosh Hain. Petah Tikva remained mainly religious settlement prior to the beginning of the 1920th years when from the third Alioi many workers lodged in her. In 1920th and 1930th cultivation of a citrus became profitable again. Petah Tikva prospered and turned into the center of services for surrounding settlements. Besides, industrialization and urbanization continued. In 1928 the way to Tel Aviv was paved. In 1934 the first industrial zone, Kiryat Ari, is founded. In the 1930th there was Haganah's headquarters here.
In 1938, 8 thousand people lived in Petah, Tikva. The sources and specified 381 days, and in 1937, 11,000. In 1937, Petah Tikva received the status of a city.
Then fast development of the industry. First of all, the enterprises for processing of agricultural products began. The number of the plants and workshops increased from 6 in 1924 to 36 in 1937. Urbanization accelerated the next crisis of gardening during World War II, proximity to Tel Aviv and high cost of the earth in the center of the country. At this time the city quickly grew, the neighboring settlements joined it. Main Yehuda, Ein Ganim, Kiefer Ganim, Kiefer Abraham and others. After foundation of the State of Israel in 1948, growth of the city even more accelerated thanks to inflow of repatriates. 22,000 inhabitants in 1948, 46,000 inhabitants in 1956, 70,000 in 1963, 115,000 in 1978. If in 1948 in the city there were 80 plants and workshops, in 1950, 200. At the same time, until the end of the 1940th, Petah Tikva remained the largest supplier of a citrus in Israel. In the 90th years of the 20th century, about repatriates, generally from the countries of the former Soviet Union, joined ranks of residents of Petah Tikva. The new enterprises were created. Metalworking, chemical, textile, food and others. In the city the industry and services sector continued to develop. One of the largest in the country, the medical center of Yitzhak Rabin, consisting of Beilinson hospitals, Halt, Sharon, Gek, and also the children's medical center of Schneider acts in the city. They serve not only residents. Besides, in the city the Ramat Mab Hospital and Geriatric Hospital, Beit Rivka, are located. In Petah Tikva, offices of all health insurance funds of Israel, Clalit, serves more than 50% of the population of the city. With Maccabi, serves about a third of the population. Moifedit and Luyumit work. Institutions and sites.
In Petah Tikva there is a memorial center, Lee's Poison, Weban, devoted to memory of the residents who fell at defense of the State of Israel.
The first similar memorial in Israel. In the same building the Museum of History of the city is located and also archaeological finds are presented. Biro located a small zoological park with an interesting collection of birds. Economy. In Petah Tikva, three of the largest industrial zones of Israel, Skula, Kiryat and Ramat Siv, are located.
In the city, low unemployment rate in comparison with other cities of Israel.
In the Skula industrial zone located on east entry into Petah Tikva, the heavy industry and shopping centers is located.
Kiryat's industrial zone is located at northern entrance and occupies the space of 50 square km.
There the heavy industry, including the metalworking plants, and the enterprises of high technologies is located. In the Ramat Siv industrial zone, on the southern entry into the city, generally there are enterprises of high technologies and shops. Despite processes of an urbanization and industrialization, in 2000 about a third of the municipal territory occupied farmlands. In 2015 in the city 85530 vehicles, from them 70605 private were registered. According to the Central Statistical Bureau of Israel, the population for the beginning of 2020 made 247,956 people. In 2018, Jews made 91.8% of the population.
18.6% of the population, the repatriates who arrived after 1990.
2018. 87.5% of inhabitants repatriates were born in the USSR. 2016. Natural increase of the population is 1.6%. 75.5% of graduates of schools received the school leaving certificate. 39% of the population have the certificate on the higher education. The average salary for 2017 was 10560 shekels. In 2016/2017 academic year in the city there were 41006 school students. In the city there are 526 kindergartens, 59 elementary schools and 51 average and senior. For 2016, 308 synagogues, from them 106 Ashkenazi work in the city. Work to 8 mikveh. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.